Okay guys, welcome back to the final video for our Unit 9, and we're going to be talking about periodontal disease right now. Periodontal disease, of course, is a term that we use to refer to diseases that affect the periodontal tissues. So what are the periodontal tissues? Well, if we look at the figure on the right, and I just draw a line in the middle of this tooth, so right down the middle. On this side we've got healthy. This is normal tissue, and on this side it's going to be negative. So this is going to represent periodontitis or periodontal disease. So if we look up here, peri usually means to the side, and dont, of course, will refer to tooth. So the periodontal tissues are the stuff that are beside the tooth. So we look at the gums, the gingiva, and that's going to be all the soft tissue here on the outside of the bone. We look at the cementum. So if we think of the crown of the tooth, which is the top part, the part that you can see up here, that's covered on the outside with enamel. Once we get below the root, it's not covered by enamel anymore, it's covered by a compound called cementum, which isn't as strong as enamel. So our cementum is what covers the outside of the tooth below the crown and the root. Next to that we have this pink layer right here. This is the periodontal ligament. And the ligament is what attaches the tooth to the alveolar bone, and that's what holds the tooth into the socket, the alveolus. So this is, on this side, like I said, this is a normal situation. If we look over here, we're going to see some of the effects of periodontal disease. So we get inflammation of the gingiva, we get loss of the alveolar bone here. There's inflammation and perhaps cavity decay of the tooth, and so on and so forth. So that's a quick introduction to periodontal disease. We'll get into some more details as we go along. So here's a video for you guys to have a look at. Alright, so how does this relate to what we've been talking about so far? Well, again, we'll have a look at our figure here, and again, we'll draw a line down the middle, which this figure has already done. So we talked about gingivitis, which is a disease of the gums where we have inflammation of the gums, and that's exactly what it is. If we see here on this picture, we've got some calculus, we've got some plaque building up down here, and those bacteria are going to cause inflammation of the gingiva, which is the soft tissue around the gum. So this could lead to an infection, but it's more or less it's an inflammation. Gingivitis can last for a long time. You can have tender or bleeding gums for a long time, and it's a very negative thing to have, but it's not something that's immediately health threatening. Over a long period of time, if this gingivitis keeps up, eventually that gingiva is going to become more and more inflamed, infected, and it's going to spread down into the deeper tissues. And that's when we develop periodontitis. And periodontitis is the inflammation of the periodontium, which is the tissues we talked about in the last slide. So it can result in a loss of gum tissue. You can have plaque and tartar extending deeper into the root or the cementum of the tooth. And this can even cause a loss of bone. If we compare the bone on this side compared to the bone on this side, we notice that this bone has gone a lot. So periodontitis is something that develops over a long time, which is why we'd see a higher incidence of periodontitis as people get older and older. But periodontitis eventually leads to the destruction of the connective tissue surrounding the tooth, supporting the tooth, and as a result of that, we could end up with tooth loss, or we could end up with loss of supporting tissue of the bone, and that can lead to some pretty serious consequences. So this slide here is quite interesting. Have a look at the slides in pairs when you're looking at these pictures. So this picture is related to this one, and this one to this one, and so on and so forth. So this is the progression of periodontal disease. So up here we'll call this A. This person has healthy teeth and gums. All right, there's the gums are a regular pink color, and you can see here the gingiva extends all the way up. We've got the periodontal ligament, we've got the alveolar bone. Everything's quite healthy. Now if we move into the second picture, we'll call B. Now we can see there's development of tartar and plaque that's gone down into the sulcus, so we're directly affecting now the gingiva. You can see the gingiva started to turn, red at the top there, and if you look here, you can see it, down here as well. You can see red spots on the gingiva that indicate early gingivitis. As this disease progresses, so we look down to panel C, now we can see even more plaque and tartar building up on the teeth. We can see that the gingiva has shrunk. It's gone down quite a bit, and again, you can notice it here on this picture. You can see this is where the normal gingiva would be on this tooth, but it's receded down to that level. And now we can start to see loss of alveolar bone in this area, in these areas right here. So this is, now we've moved into periodontitis. And then the final picture here, if we look at figure D, you can see late stage periodontitis. You can see major loss of bone tissue down here. The gums have receded a tremendous amount. So a normal healthy gums would be at this level. All of this part of the tooth now is exposed, and there's very little supporting tissue there for that tooth. It may fall out. It's already probably quite loose. Now, some of the risk factors for periodontal disease, some of the things that can increase your chances of developing periodontal disease is going to be some things you can control and some things you might not necessarily be able to. Some of the things you can definitely control is your oral hygiene and smoking and chewing tobacco. Those things will definitely contribute to periodontal disease. But these also factors here that you may not consider, like your nutrition, what you eat, stress that you're under, how you manage stress, medications that you take, even your hormonal balance. These are all things that can have an effect on your chances or your susceptibility to periodontal disease. Other diseases, and this may not seem intuitive, but stuff like diabetes, heart disease, stroke, HIV/AIDS, these are also contributing factors to your susceptibility to periodontal disease. And we'll talk a little bit more about these more severe conditions towards the end of the unit. Okay, so right now I'm hoping you guys have a pretty good idea of the connection between microbes and periodontal disease. Of course, it'll start off with the development of plaque and a biofilm, and then once those things are established, it depends on how that plaque and biofilm grows and extends, and how far you let it go and extend. Periodontal disease will occur if that plaque and biofilm is allowed to penetrate deep into the tissues. Once it gets down below the root, below the gingiva, so that area right there, now we're putting the periodontal tissues at risk. So these pathogens are present and they get the disease started, and then one of the things that can happen is the disease is further spread by these microbes moving into those some gingival pockets, so these areas right here between the enamel and the roots and the gingiva. And then don't forget, those bacteria will have those virulence factors, and those are the things we talked about in an earlier unit that allow them to be a little bit more infective or virulent. So hopefully you guys can remember all of these. When we talk about virulence factors, we talked about attachment and fimbriae and capsules. So this is, think about the formation of the pellicle and the biofilm, how plaque begins to start. And then eventually we get evasion of the host defenses, so bacterial capsules, being able to have enzymes such as coagulase that'll allow bacteria to escape immune systems, streptokinase, which can then allow them to multiply and then escape their defenses, essentially. Don't forget the enzymes we talked about, hyaluronidase and collagenase. Those things allow bacteria to penetrate deeper into tissues. We also have these toxins that we talked about, so our exotoxins and endotoxins. All of these things are going to contribute to these bacteria causing diseases such as gingivitis and periodontitis. So keep those things in mind. This is why we talked about those earlier in the semester, on how these things can contribute to a greater health risk than just a cavity. This is a great figure here showing the progression of gum disease. So we start over here with healthy teeth and gums. and we move into gingivitis, and then all of these different stages of periodontitis. Down here you'll get a list of the symptoms. If we look down here, and in these figures here, it'll show you what's actually occurring to the tooth and the periodontium as we get into these different stages of disease. So this is a good figure for you guys to have your head wrapped around, so you understand the progression of this disease and how it relates to microbial activity. Now, some of the bacteria that are involved in periodontal disease, they're not the same ones that are involved in the formation of plaque and dental caries. Most of the ones that are the causes of periodontal disease are going to be gram-negative anaerobic bacteria. And you can see a list of the species here. I don't expect you guys to remember those species, but just note that they're not the same ones that cause cavities like the Streptococcus mutans and the Actinomycetes and the Lactobacillus. These are all different species, and they generally tend to operate deeper into the tissue than those last ones that we talked about, which are the ones that are cariogenic. Now, one thing that we need to make pretty clear is that periodontal disease and gingivitis is an inflammatory disease. And one thing that is something that not many people initially consider is the fact that if we have inflammation in our body, it contributes to inflammation in other parts of our body. So if you suffer from periodontal disease, the chances of you developing all of these much more serious conditions, it goes up considerably because of the inflammation that's already present in your mouth. So a stroke, cardiovascular disease, chronic respiratory disease, the aggravation of diabetes if you were to have it, poor glycemic control in diabetic patients, adverse pregnancy outcomes, these are all linked, these very serious conditions are all linked to periodontal disease through the fact that periodontal disease promotes inflammation. So you can have a look at some of the statistics in these blurbs on the side here, but it just goes to show that periodontal disease can lead to stuff that's much more serious than just a loose tooth or a tooth loss, for example. And these last couple of figures are going to highlight some of the things that periodontal disease can affect. So it can have effects on your brain, heart, lungs, liver, kidney, developing fetus. Even if you've had a prosthetic or a joint replacement, this is all be affected by periodontal disease. And then finally, you can have a look at this video here, which will talk you through some of the finer points of periodontal disease and what goes on clinically and pathologically when that happens. Okay, and that's the end of Unit 9.